Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
So Emily, have you ever seen this SNL skit from a couple years ago where Sam Adams is doing this tasting at a grocery store, kind of like a Whole Foods, and they have all these people coming up, the SNL cast members, and they're like, oh yeah, this is great. I don't drink beer, but this pumpkin ale is something that might make me start drinking beer. And it's got Bill Burr in it, but he's like playing the real Bostonian. Have you seen this one?
No, I have not, but I'm laughing picturing.
Oh, you got to look it up. It's hilarious because he's like, he drinks it and he's like, this tastes like shit. And then he drinks another and he just starts getting hammered. And he says like, this beer tastes terrible. It's the kind of beer your friend brings over and then leaves in your fridge. And then when other people come over, you have nothing. You say, I got this pumpkin beer, and you end up drinking it because it gives you a buzz, but it's terrible. Anyways, I think they need to redo this skit now because they're actually coming into cannabis, right? With their new TeaPot product. And maybe they can do it like with a Canadian, like a good Canadian comedian. I don't know, like a true Canadian kind of saying, what they think about this new drink here.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I do love all the Boston stuff since I lived there for a period of time. And from up the beach here in Revere, you're welcome. But I think that it's a fun thing to play on that. And it'd be really fun to play on the Canadian side of things. It makes me think back to, Rick Moranis and John Candy and those guys doing those great movies from the 80s. So that'd be a really clever move for them.
Yeah. I don't know like what the equivalent is of like the real Boston person, the Canadian version of that. There's that series Letterkenny. I don't know if you've seen that. Maybe that would be a good fit. I don't know. It's pretty exciting. I think I love seeing headlines like this. I think when you see an organization like the Boston Beer Company jumping into the cannabis category directly and not just investing in a Canadian LP, but actually going and formulating and producing a product, that's pretty exciting. And the closest thing that I can kind of remember to this might be Truss, which was a JV between Molson Coors and I believe Hexo coming into the category. But it wasn't Molson saying, hey, we're Molson, we're going to produce a new product. It was more about, hey, we're going to just work with this LP. And I'm not sure, where one starts and the other ends, but that's probably the closest parallel to what we're seeing now with Sam Adams or the Boston Beer Company.
Yeah, totally. And there is something to think about. Cannabis is an herb and herbs are in tea. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that they would try to figure out how to play with this version of a cannabis beverage.
Yeah, and they talk about trying to be one of the most innovative beverage companies out there in their press release about this that came out a couple weeks ago. They also talk about they're awaiting further progress on U.S. regulations while they'll develop an exciting pipeline in the federally regulated market of Canada. So it really seems like they do have broad ambitions here, but really just starting in Canada.
Yes, they do. And I think that's their launch pad where they feel safest to do it because of the federal status of it. But it is going to be an interesting launch up there to see how it goes.
So let's talk a bit about, what this drink is specifically, because there's a lot of different beverages and different ways of doing beverages. So they're positioning it as a tea, obviously with the name. And I think it's got a capital P in the name. I was looking at their press release. So they're really emphasizing the pot in TeaPot, which is, it's funny, you'd think all the kind of puns would have been taken at this point, and they managed to find one. In their messaging, they're saying it's positioned as the right tea, the right pot for the right occasion. And that's marketing speak for, I guess, they're bringing in certain strains. The first one that they're going to launch with in their what they're calling Good Day Iced Tea, which is the only one they've announced so far, is a strain Pedro's Sweet Sativa, which apparently is a unique cultivar out there from Entourage Health Corp in Canada, who they're working with on this project. Strain specific here, but at the same time in their message, they talk about no cannabis taste or aroma. I think in some ways that's a good thing. You hear a lot of people complain about like when it tastes like too weedy, maybe too bitter, whatever it is that people don't like. But I'm curious about where the strain comes through and like how that's going to impact the effect of the drink, if at all, with the terpenes. If they're taking out any sort of aroma, they're potentially taking out all those terpenes, but maybe getting back in like the tea formulation. And the last thing I'll say is it's 5 milligrams per can, which is also kind of unique for Canada because you're seeing a lot of 10 milligram cans out there.
Yeah, it does feel like, 5 milligrams is the more approachable dosing. And so if you're trying to reach into an audience that hasn't really had an affinity for cannabis products, I guess that's why you would tote the It does not have an aroma. And I happen to think they are probably using a broad stroke to paint over the complexity of cannabis and the aromas that can exist and do exist in the plant, because of that. The prior edible world, before we got so sophisticated, it was kind of like, here's a gummy with weed spray painted on it, right? And so the profile didn't necessarily match the taste of the gummy. But as we know, we had Nancy from Wanna Gummies on, and she was very articulate about how they contemplate formulation, taste profiles, and then the strains of cannabis that they're using to match that, so that the terpenes are kind of augmenting or playing into the flavor. So I don't know, I see black tea with lemon and I'm already seeing terpenes in that flavor profile that you can dial up. We were talking before the show about like limonene. So maybe they're just saying that so that people who are newer to the category just know it's not going to taste like me taking a bite out of a bud of weed.
Right.
It's going to be a little different. Yeah.
Right. No, that's a great point. And it's the first one. And, I don't think it's going to be introduced until July, I think. So I'm not even sure if it's on store shelves yet. So we'll see, how that's going to play out and how it tastes and the effects pretty soon. But I did want to talk about data and kind of what we're seeing in the beverage market. We talk about beverages quite a bit, and I think maybe no surprise to the listeners that it's certainly a small portion of the market. I pulled some data in Canada. From Headset, we have Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Ontario data, and the beverage category is about 2% of the market, so 2% of total sales. Year to date, that's about $30 million so far. So if it continues to track, you're looking at about $60 million in total sales this year, maybe more. This is year to date through May. So yeah, pretty small category, right? The sales ratio too in Canada, it's a lot of units for a low dollar amount. And I think that's because a lot of single serving cans out there, and that has to do with the regs in Canada, 10 milligram max, but it's like a pretty unique ratio. The only other category that's like that is pre-rolls, where you see a lot of individual units going out the door, low price. You don't see that with flower or vapor pen or so on, because just larger package size, more expensive items. It's also the most discounted, or second most discounted, I should say, right behind topicals, which is an even smaller category at 3.6%. And to kind of give you a sense of discounting, flower on average is 2.7. So, more of a discounted product. Maybe it's because it's a new category. I don't know, what the strategy is there, but we are seeing more discounting happening. So there's an interesting thing here, right? It's a small category. They're jumping into this. Obviously, it's the category they're going to jump into because they're coming from the beverage world, but it is tiny, right? And I don't know. Is this going to help move the needle, you think? Is this going to, drive more beverages because it's coming from a company that's so synonymous, with beverage? Or is it just going to be, one more in a small pool?
I think that having these big players in the space to help lead the category forward, to spend in the category the way that they know how to spend to drive attraction and growth, it's all critical to bringing this category into a bigger sphere, really, because if you look at the profile of what Sam Adams has done over the years, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, they started in kind of helping to define the craft beer space as we understand it to be today, and then they also got into the twisted tea beverage. I don't know if you've ever had the chance to try that.
I haven't, but in kind of researching this, there was a twisted tea thing that went viral. Did you see this? Where a guy in like a convenience store, it's like hit a guy with it. It was like somebody was saying all sorts of racist nonsense, and the guy had twisted tea and like hit him over the head. And I guess twisted tea went viral after that, and sales shot through the roof. Even obviously nothing to do with the Boston Beer Company, but just one of those random moments. But I have not had one.
Yeah. Oh, it's something. I used to drink them when I was a young legal gal, and Morgan will crack up even thinking about this. That was like my beverage of choice while they were drinking like some of the lower quality beer back in the day. But, so they endeavored into it there, and then they've gotten into the seltzer. And so, when I was looking at the company and kind of the path of the company, how it's been performing, how its stock's been performing, I think that what they're trying to do is understand what's happening on a consumer behavior shift that has been going on for a bit of time here, right? Like you've got your craft beer loyalists who love good beer, and even trends around beer are shifting. And you can see how it's shifting around the IPAs to less kind of boozy thing. Anyway, it's really interesting. The sours were big for a while, and then this seltzer thing exploded, and they moved into that category, which was a big millennial move into these seltzers. And now I feel like they're trying to track to another consumer shift, which is people potentially moving away from spending on alcohol and spending instead on cannabis. And this was something that Bloomberg actually talked about. They actually had a quick fact about it over the weekend. And I feel like it's just, if they're picking up on it, it's a pretty big trend. And they noted that of people ages 18 to 24, 69% prefer marijuana to alcohol, according to a recent survey.
69%.
Yeah. Now,
that's massive.
I don't know how what that survey was like, but that's a pretty big statement. So, and it tracks to what we've been talking about since we started the podcast. So that's my thinking, is that they're trying to stay ahead of a massive consumer shift that they're seeing.
Yeah. I think that's a good takeaway there, because it is very much an emerging category, and they probably see it as such. I mean, when you think about the scale of the beverage category in Canada and how that impacts Boston Beer, it's pretty small. They did $2 billion in revenue last year. So if they were to capture 50% of the opportunity in Canada, it'd still be like 1%. So it can't be, I mean, a percent is a percent. That's got to help, especially given like Boston Beer's kind of current slide. Like it's not looking good for them this year, looking like, negative growth, maybe 1% negative on the like upside. Cowen actually just did a report on this, looking at Nielsen data around their beer, their seltzer, and seltzer's really killing them. Like seltzer's not doing well. And I guess the seltzer category in general is just super saturated and just kind of, not performing. So I think it's dragging them down. So for sure, if they can find opportunities here, that will help. But I think it's got to be like a test bed for the future, because, I think that it's definitely not going to move the needle in meaningful ways, even with like that kind of, younger audience saying, yeah, we much prefer this, until I think they can do something in the US. I think, when they can come here, maybe get more scale, and some of the challenges we have with the cannabis category, just access and everything, as that unfolds, then certainly, this will be, a great category for them. And they're probably going to have some first mover advantages. When you think about them as like a craft beer, I mean, before Sam Adams, there really wasn't, I can't recall like, a craft beer like that. I know there were some imports and stuff that were around, like Bass was really popular, like Heineken even before that, and just other kind of imports. But from like a craft beer, there really wasn't much, right? And they kind of came out and changed the game. And so maybe the first mover advantage will pay dividends for them here.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, as opposed to trying to play catch up on the insanely saturated seltzer category, which kind of by definition lacks differentiation. It's like, which artificially flavored fizzy water thing do you want to drink? I think very little of the seltzer category. I love regular seltzer, but not boozy seltzer. But, I think that so maybe there's more moat around this. Like if you can find your lane in cannabis, because it's not easy, as we all know, for all of the myriad reasons. And I think, we've talked about the limitations around packaging and marketing in Canada. So it'll be interesting to see how they do navigate that, and if they're just leveraging their US brand presence to kind of drive that. I'm not sure, but that's probably why they're using it as a proving ground, to see if they can get traction. And if they can in that kind of a constrained environment, then maybe it's go time here in the US.
Yeah, and we'll probably know that it's a success when SNL finally does a skit about their tea instead of their beer.
Yeah, you should send that one in.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.